Hi, I'm Alana Miller, MD, an integrative psychiatrist and private practice owner who mentors psychiatrists and psych NPs on integrative psychiatry protocols and business strategies to be successful in private practice. And today I will be answering all of your private practice and integrative psychiatry questions. So this is a Q&A session based off of questions that I was sent in from Instagram. So I'm gonna hop right in. This question from Maisel. Hi, currently studying for the MCAT, a bit depressed and almost not seeing the light of becoming a physician here in the States. If I continue, I can definitely get in, but my question to you is, would you recommend medicine as a career to your loved ones and why? So personally, I absolutely would recommend medicine as a career with a couple of caveats, and not to say every single specialty for every single person, but I can genuinely tell you that I love every day of my life. I love my career, and I'm so glad I stuck it through the difficult years that it took in order to get to this point. I really loved the first 2 years of medical school, but I basically hated the second 2 years of medical school, and then the first 2 years of residency were pretty brutal, but those 4 years were worth it in order to get to where I am now. Look, I understand that things are moving toward the corporate practice of medicine, and if you are going into a specialty where you don't have control over that trajectory, or you aren't able to carve out a private practice or a creative pursuit, then I think medicine could be a little bit more of a struggle. So I actually went into medical school to be a surgeon. Some of you watching this may or may not be familiar with that story. I was certain I was going to be a surgeon from the age of, I don't know, like 12 years old or something like that. And then I got into med school, I did surgery research, I got a really good score on my boards, I got AOA. You know, I thought I had to get really good scores and grades in order to match in the surgical subspecialty I wanted to match in, but I just really did not like my surgery rotation, and it felt just very mechanical and not creative, and I didn't just vibe honestly with the personality types of people who went into surgery. At the time that I was applying to residency, psychiatry is considered one of the least competitive and least prestigious specialties to go into. I think that that's changed since then. I think psychiatry is a lot more popular now and a lot more competitive, but at the time for me, I was essentially switching from, you know, the most prestigious specialty, surgery, to the one that you were kind of like a loser or a weirdo if you went into. But I did it because I felt within psychiatry, first of all, I felt very passionate about it and interested in it, but also felt as a specialty that lent itself to creative pursuits, where you're learning a skill set that's not just limited to clinical care. You know, it seemed to overlap with another interest of mine, writing. It seemed to potentially give me opportunities to be in the media, which was something I was interested in even then. So if you're going into a specialty, I would say, instead of choosing what seems most prestigious, choose the one where you feel like you can carve out your own little corner. And that may be private practice, that may be clinical practice, but it may be other avenues as well. The last thing you want to do is to go into a medical field where there's 0% chance you're going to have any control over your life, because certainly things are moving toward corporate practice of medicine. Insurance companies, private equity firms are squeezing all of us out and making it so that we have to just see a gazillion patients and get minimal reimbursement for it. So if you pick a specialty, pick one that is more future-proof from that standpoint. But genuinely, I am so glad I went to medical school. Like I said, those were a tough 4 years, but I genuinely enjoy what I do every day. It feels really meaningful. I feel like I really get to help my patients, and I feel like it's the kind of work that I could do into my 70s. Okay, moving on, next question. This one's from Jake. What are your tips for combating professional isolation in private practice? I greatly enjoyed the small interactions that occur with others, colleagues, and staff in a clinic setting, but am sick of working for institutions. So I'll tell you what I do, and then I'll tell you some other options as well. I personally am a little bit more on the introverted side, so I don't mind the semi-solitary nature of being a private practice clinician. I like working from home too with a telepractice where it's kind of just me, my computer, my patients, and it's pretty relaxing, I would say. And I can kind of be in my own world. I actually like that. But what I don't like is feeling like I'm out of the loop clinically or in terms of my knowledge base. And so what I go out of my way to do that also I think gets two birds with one stone, improves my knowledge base, but also gets me out of the house a little bit socializing, is I go out of my way to go to conferences. Even if it involves, you know, flying and paying for a hotel and stuff, I look at it as not just like a business expense, but also a chance to just get to meet people, interact with my colleagues, make sure I'm up to date on the latest and greatest in terms of research. The other thing too is I have my mentorship program, Dream Practice Academy, which now has has like 200 plus people in it. So that's a little de facto community that I created that I get to obviously be a part of as well. So it helps me feel like I'm still connected even though I'm in a solo private practice. Other things that you can do that I don't do just because I don't have the time, but are things I would recommend you do if you're concerned about being a little bit isolated, is can you be adjunct volunteer clinical faculty at your local academic institution? So for example, I went to UCLA, it's just down the street from me. A lot of people I went to residency with, or like my former attendings, they're in private practice, but they volunteer to do like a half day a week in one of the clinics there and supervise residents. And from what they described to me, it's both like keeps you in the loop, but also it's a little bit of a social hour. You know, I'm sure you remember being in residency and you see, you know, the attendings kind of shooting the while you're in between seeing patients. You can also be volunteer clinical faculty and do psychotherapy supervision if you're trained in that and you have the knowledge base to be able to do supervision. And that way you can kind of schedule it on your own time and you're not committed to a full half day a week. So for example, when I was in residency, my psychotherapy supervisors were volunteer faculty who met with me, you know, once a week to go over psychotherapy cases, and they got all the benefits of being adjunct faculty by virtue of doing that. So yes, private practice can be lonely if you don't go out of your way in order to stay connected. But to me, that's a solvable thing. You just put in a little extra effort and you can keep those connections going. Okay, next question from Danielle. How many patients are you seeing a day / a week? I'll give you two answers. This used to be, prior to my cancer relapse and my stem cell transplant, 20 to 25 clinical encounters a week. And I would say maybe 2/3 of those would be hour or like 15-minute psychotherapy sessions. That, in my experience, ends up being most people's full time. Around 20 to 25 clinical hours or patient encounters, however you count it, a week, Monday through Thursday. Most people don't work Fridays. And then you need a couple of hours to do admin. And so folding that all in, that's about a 4-day-a-week full-time private practice schedule. You know, when I had my relapse, I took several months totally off. And then I slowly but surely started building things back up again, like one patient at a time. But I never went back to that same schedule I had before. I just didn't really want to. I didn't really need to. I have my mentorship program, which also takes up, you know, probably half of my time. So I'm really only seeing, I'd say like 10 to 15 patients a week now. And then the rest of the time is working on Dream Practice Academy or just, I don't know, hobbies, work with a personal trainer, you know, I read, that kind of stuff. Next question. What EMR do you recommend for an integrative psychiatry private practice? So I recommend Practice Q or Intake Q. It's funny because I don't get paid from them. I feel like I should reach out to me, Intake Q, but I genuinely recommend them because I think they're the best software that exists. Because what you're looking for this kind of practice, you're not having a massive primary care or family practice. For our use, which is essentially a solo private practice, or even if it's a small group practice, I think Intake Q or Practice Q is equally good. You don't really need a big EHR with all the bells and whistles. Like something like Practice Fusion has just way too many features to be useful for a psychiatrist in private practice, whereas Intake Q or Practice Q to me meets that perfect balance of having all the features, the core features that you need, but also having really great software automations to make your job easier. Because the other thing that happens in a private practice is you probably don't have someone else doing all of your admin. Some of us will hire like a part-time virtual admin assistant, but as opposed to a job where you have a whole staff that's running a front desk and doing all the billing and phone calls and responding to patient inquiries and all that, a lot of that's going to fall on you in a private practice. And Intake Q or Practice Q makes it really easy for a lot of those processes to be automated. They have a really great scheduling widget you can set up. They have really great email automations. They have a really great auto bill feature where the patient's credit card is automatically billed at the time of the appointment according to the fee schedule that you program in, and you can program a different fee schedule for different patients. Basically just every feature I think an EHR should have, it has. I also have been using Intake Q in some form for like 6 or 7 years, way longer than they were a fully fledged EHR. When I started my practice, it was just intake forms, and I've seen the way that that company has improved and added features over the years. So I really do think it's just only going to get better. And every time they say they're going to add a feature, like they didn't have ERX for a while and they said they were going to add it, and they did. The one thing they don't have right now is an an e-labs integration. I mean, they have an integration with a specialty lab company called Ruba Health, but not with one of like the basic lab companies like Quest or LabCorp, but they are in the process of working on it, and I know based on past experience with them, they're going to deliver. Okay, next question from Kelly. Any recommendations on bookkeeping? I'm still a small practice and would like an affordable option as I can't even justify QuickBooks at $30 a month at this time. Okay, I'm going to answer this question in two ways. And the first is going to be, I'm going to challenge that assumption that you can't afford a software for $30 a month that's going to save you time. Now, maybe if you, in the very beginning, if you have literally zero patients, you want to be careful about this. But let's say you're charging, I don't know, like let's just arbitrarily say $400 an hour. That software has to save you like 6 minutes a month for it to be worth the cost that you're being charged for it. So if something can save you time, then you should absolutely sign up for that software. Now, that being said, I don't think QuickBooks is necessary in a private practice because really you don't even need an accountant when you start your practice. You need an accountant the January, the year after you start your practice, because that's when you're going to give them all your info and they're going to file taxes for you. First off, the only thing you really need at tax time is an Excel sheet or a Google sheet with all of your expenses categorized by category, and you give that to your accountant. They'll put it on a Schedule C if you're a sole proprietor. It's a little bit more complex if you have a corporation, but either way, they'll do your taxes for you based on that. And in terms of income, you just get that reported on a 1099K. Credit card merchant accounts, assuming you're taking credit card in a cash practice, will provide you with a 1099K at the beginning of the following next year, and that will say all your merchant transactions, and then you just give that to the accountant, and that's your income, and then they deduct your expenses. I have relatively complex taxes. I have two corporations, one for my private practice, one for my mentorship program, and still I only use a software for the Mac called Bankivity, which is a single fee, and then there's a tiny subscription fee. I think it's like $50 a year that I pay so that it syncs my credit card transactions with the software, and then I use that, and then I input everything onto an Excel file at the beginning of the following calendar year, and I give that to my accountant, and she uses that to do my taxes. So just keep track of your expenses, put everything on a credit card, and at the very least, at the beginning of the following year, you can print out all your credit card statements and categorize things, and that will be enough for your accountant along with the 1099Ks from the merchant account. Next question. Do people in your mentorship program have issues getting their home address approved for their DEA licenses and renewals? This gets really complicated. The answer is rarely yes, they do, but you shouldn't worry about it. And let me give a little bit of context to this because it's such a clusterfuck, honestly. The current regulation with the DEA, and this is as of August 2024 when I'm recording this, is that if you work from home in a telepractice, you are required to put your home address as your DEA address. People freak out about this, thinking that it's going to be publicly searchable and their patients will see it, but your DEA address is not publicly searchable, as opposed to your medical license address, which is, or your NPI address, which is publicly searchable. You don't want to put your home address for those. But for the DEA, you're supposed to put the address where you yourself are physically located. And it even says that on the DEA website. However, the rules are confusing enough that sometimes people who work for the DEA don't know the rules. So it has happened a couple of times that people in my program have told me that the DEA has not approved their renewal or not approved their DEA when it's listed as a home address. Now, what they do in this case is they just call, talk to someone who knows the rules, and then they get it fixed. So don't be discouraged if you get some sort of pushback. Just follow the rules as they're laid out on the website. You can always point back to that. And then if there's an issue, call them. If the person you call doesn't know the answer or tells you the wrong answer, just hang up politely and then call again the next day and hopefully talk to someone else who knows the right answer. I'll tell you one quick story about the DEA, because the other thing that people freak out about is listing their DEA as their home address, being concerned that the DEA could come to their home. And that actually has happened to one person in my program, but it was not a big deal whatsoever. Essentially, the DEA showed up at her home and said, "Hey, can we come in?" And she said, "No, I'm kind of busy." And they said, "Okay, see you later." And then that was was it. They weren't there to search the home. What they're doing and what the DEA is auditing is making sure that addresses listed as your DEA address are not virtual addresses, are not like PO boxes or virtual office addresses. There has to be an actual physical office there. So when they're doing these in-person visits, that's what they're checking for, not that it's your home. Okay, next question. What is best, claims versus occurrence-based malpractice insurance? Okay, the short answer is claims, and let me explain why. Occurrence malpractice insurance covers you as long as you have the policy when the event occurred, whereas claims-based policies only covers you if you had the policy active when the claim happened. So for example, let's say I sign up for malpractice insurance today, then I commit malpractice tomorrow, and then I cancel the policy the following day, and then I'm sued in a year. On an occurrence policy, I would be covered for that claim. On a claims policy, I would not. So when I explain it that way, it seems that occurrence would be better, right? But the problem is, because it offers so much more coverage in that sense, it's many multiples more expensive. So what makes much more sense for people in private practice, where typically you're having this practice for decades, is to get a much less expensive claims policy. And then if you ever do decide to close the practice, you just purchase what's called a tail policy, which is usually a multiple of whatever your annual cost was for the policy at that time. And it's a single fee, and then that covers you for any claims that happen in the future. So like going back to that example, I sign up for a policy today, commit malpractice tomorrow, and then the next day I cancel the policy. If it's a claims policy, I could still buy a tail, and then I would be covered in that claim that happened in a year. The other thing too is for claims policies, if you are closing the practice because you're retiring, a lot of malpractice carriers will comp you the tail policy. Mine, MIEC, does that. So if I close my practice, I think it has to be like when I'm older than 55, they'll give me the tail policy for free. Now, when I explain it all this way, hopefully it becomes clear why you want a claims policy in a private practice, but also why, if you ever have a job, you want to make sure they're covering you with an occurrence policy. Because what happens if you leave that job and then you're sued for something that happened when you were working there? I think we all assume we're covered, but unless you are covered with an occurrence policy, or if it's a claims, they purchase a tail policy for you, you are actually not covered. And I know at least one member of my program who told me that when he asked about this, it turns out he was covered with a claims policy, and they were expecting him to purchase his own tail policy. So just be aware of that when you're negotiating malpractice coverage with employment. Okay, next question. How many years of conventional med management experience do you recommend before starting an integrative psychiatry private practice? If you're a psychiatrist, none. You can start this right after residency. However, if you're a psych NP or a PA, I would recommend at least 1 year full-time experience. I say this because you want to have basic med management under your belt well. And I also think med management is not rocket science. I know there's this really stupid turf battle that happens between psychiatrists and psych NPs, and psychiatrists will sometimes talk down to psych NPs like their training isn't as good, and certainly their training is a lot shorter. But like, let's be honest, med management you can learn in 6 months. For the most part, it's not rocket science. What is a little bit trickier is diagnosing properly, proper diagnosis. But honestly, I'm a psychiatrist and I've had my practice for 7 years and I still make diagnostic mistakes. So I think no matter what your degree is, you have to have some humility. Really, for med management though, I think a year of experience, and then you get some basic manuals. You get the Schatzberg manual, you get Stahl's prescribing guidelines, you get the Maudsley guide, and use those as references with your patients, and you're going to be solid in terms of your med management foundation in order to add integrative psychiatry on top of that. And the reason I think everyone needs to have solid med management and basic psychopharm under their belt before they start practicing integrative psychiatry is because when I see people trying to do integrative psychiatry without having that foundation, they end up practicing alternative medicine or alternative psychiatry. They kind of don't want to use medications. They have this idea that the alternative stuff is superior, and they kind of practice green pharmacy, but that's not in your patient's best interest. You want to do what's in your patient's best interest. Sometimes that might be some green pharmacy approaches and some nutraceuticals, but sometimes it's going to be the psychopharm. And you want to have that wisdom to be able to evaluate in a given patient situation what combo or what tools you need to pull from your tool belt. All right, well, that's all we have for questions today. If you want to learn more about my program Dream Practice Academy, click the link in the description below. And if you want to see more about what the life is, the average day is like in a private practice psychiatrist's life, then click somewhere up here. I'll have a link to my vlog, A Day in the Life of a Private Practice Psychiatrist. I'll see you there.